before. So my name's Summer Austin. I'm actually entering my second year as a PhD student at UCL's Institute of Archaeology, where I am focusing on the trade of illicit antiquities, particularly Egyptian antiquities at the moment. So a lot of my examples will be Egypt, but I try to find examples from all around the world. For this session today, I'm going to be giving an overview of some of the considerations and methods that archaeologists use for studying the antiquities market. I'll present a brief overview of the structure of the market and how we go about investigating what's an incredibly opaque and insulated entity. By then, I hope that you'll have a better understanding of the structure of the market and be able to identify key actors and characteristics of the market, as well as the complexities, considerations, and methods for this type of research, which is illustrated through several case studies. Here we go. So the trade in illicit antiquities is a supply and demand transnational crime that employs complex networks that result in end market consumers often being shielded from penalties. Demand for antiquities results in antiquities sourced from often less secure states in violation of the law in one or both of the locations. As objects change hands, they experience a degree of cleaning from their black market origins to a gray market or to a seemingly more legitimate market. These objects transition from artifact to loot to commodity and finally to a collectible item. This is achieved through the efforts of intermediaries known as Janus figures, who move the object from illicit to licit. This process of becoming licit allows for the acceptance of the object and further removes it from original context. Cultural objects enter destination markets as commodities, and once they enter private collections or museums, they become both social capital and capital assets. When we examine the trade in antiquities, it's beneficial to separate into three parts, as seen here. So source, transit, and market. But as you can see from this model, trafficked objects rarely follow a linear path from source through transit and into the market. Objects can and do often flow in and out of these designations, making detection, prevention, and research on the market incredibly difficult. This is compounded by the difficulty of entering the market. It's made up of a combination of actors who both see themselves as criminals and those who do not, who are motivated by a wide range of reasons and who function in different roles within the model. So what are some of the big questions archaeologists want to know about the trade of antiquities? Seems kind of like something a little bit different for archaeologists. Well, we really want to know the actual size and scope of the market, both in terms of the volume of objects and the value of the trade. And by value, I mean both financial and emotional, physical, political. Like it's not just financial when I say value. Understanding the size and scope of the market helps us allocate resources in order to combat looting and destruction and the illicit antiquities trade. How do we as researchers investigate something that is so opaque and insulated, especially when you consider the transnational aspects of the market? What may be legal in one country isn't in another, or it is, but there's a statute of limitations for the return or prosecution, and all those are different depending on the country. Some statutes of limitations start when the crime takes place. Some start when you first know the crime, and it is different everywhere. Also, access to data and records or individuals, all of which, due to the illicit nature of the market, are not readily available or highly motivated to be examined, which creates further hurdles for researchers. It's also sometimes dangerous to undertake this type of research, both for the researcher and for the participants. Interviewing traffickers and organized criminals is obviously hazardous, and getting ethics approval is, as I can attest, not always super straightforward. But also speaking to looters can be dangerous for them. They may be being pressured, and by speaking to me, they could then be in danger from those that are pressuring them. You also need to consider like what you're publishing. If I publish something that says this area is being looted, does that indicate to looters that it's an archaeologically rich area? And then signal for them to go loot there. So there's a bunch of different things you have to think about. Even the terms we use, looter versus subsistence digger, all have ramifications. And these are just some of the considerations when undertaking this kind of research. Another aspect of this type of research is its multidisciplinary aspect. Researchers in the fields of archaeology, criminology, international law, economics, museums, history, and increasingly computer science and AI all bring extremely useful theories and research models to the table. Criminological theories such as creative compliance, neutralizing theories, and organizational deviance, as well as routine activity theory, can all be applied so that we can understand what motivates criminals and what motivates people that participate in an illicit market but don't see themselves as criminals. Legal aspects such as tax law and statutes of limitation, due diligence, all these are highly considered. Provenance research and scientific methods of authentication and help us to determine whether or not something is genuine or a forgery. And computer modeling and data scraping and AI help predict networks and trafficking and collecting. All these different fields of research, theories, and models help researchers investigate what is a highly dynamic and multi-layered issue. And what constitutes a heritage crime? You can see a list here of what some of the crimes are considered. Each one will have a different motivation and result and a type of research methodology. But yeah, so following the source transit model, we're going to discuss methods and considerations and some case studies for researching each phase of the trade. So when we say source, what we mean is essentially where the stuff comes from. This is characteristically from archaeologically rich countries and is usually associated with economically or politically insecure countries, although not always. Disproportionately, this affects countries in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Central, and South America. This stage of the model, the action of looting the object is almost always illegal, which places it within the black market. Research into this aspect of the market attempts to understand motivations and methods of looters, the scale of known destruction, identifying previously unknown looting, and measuring the effectiveness of national or international regulations, as well as educational programs and what structures are in place nationally or locally that facilitate or prohibit the looting of cultural heritage. The actors of this level include subsistence diggers or looters. These can be individuals or gangs of organized looters. Other actors include local heritage workers, including archaeologists, community members, and government officials. As stated before, this type of research can be dangerous and should be attempted with sensitivity and consideration for all involved. Different types of quantitative research often involve ethnographic fieldwork, interviewing actors to better understand the human aspect of looting. I've included 2 case studies. The first looks at subsistence digging in Iran. The authors provide a detailed overview of the situation in Iran and what local, national, and international aspects facilitate subsistence digging and considerations for combating looting. They argue for the distinction between subsistence digging and looting, saying that without that distinction, effective solutions cannot be achieved. In the second case study, the authors surveyed archaeologists from around the world and found that over half of archaeologists did not report looting to the authorities when viewed as need versus greed. They further examined the reasons for this underreporting, as well as adamantly argue that it is an archaeologist's duty to report looting. I've included a quote from the article, which you can see here, and I'll give you a moment to read it. What do you think? Do you think archaeologists have professional, moral, and ethical duty to report looting? It's a very tough decision to make for archaeologists. So quantitative research has really progressed in the last 5 to 6 years when looking at source. Early quantitative research included field surveys and aerial photography, which was expensive, time-consuming, and very rarely repeated, resulting in only a snapshot of the problem. But now with open source data such as Google Earth, we're able to get much clearer pictures of the damage being done. We included a case study of satellite imagery done in Syria between 2011 and 2014. As you can plainly see, the destruction is immense. So those are all looting pits. Quantitative research like this provides long-term data, which is more accessible and measurable than previous studies. So moving forward along the trafficking chain, we reach the much more ambiguous stage, transit. Transit stage is essentially how the stuff gets from one place to another. It's the in-between place, the in-between illegal and legal, unethical and ethical, inappropriate and appropriate, between black and white, and it's what we call the gray market. It is at this point that objects start their transformation from cultural heritage into loot and into a commodity. This transformation is important and is yet to be really examined. However, that is starting to change. Actors that take part in the transit phase are traffickers, the ones that move the objects, brokers, the ones that organize the networks, and other intermediaries, including customs officials, packers, restorers, and dealers. Here you see some news developments that just announced this week. The New York District Attorney's Office indicted a British restorer for their role in a decades-long global antiquities trafficking ring that looted and smuggled culturally significant relics from Asia and sold them in the New York art market. Another headline is this 90-year-old grandmother who, when she was a diplomat's wife, smuggled hundreds of Egyptian artifacts out of Egypt using her diplomatic immunity, and now displays them in her home in Western Australia with absolutely no consequences. Transit nations that are used to move objects through, may have lax import-export laws or strong privacy protection laws. Think Switzerland or the Cayman Islands, or have pre-existing dependency on an illicit market. Antiquities are often trafficked with other things like wildlife, drugs, weapons, and people, which is where much of our current understanding of trafficking comes from. This is understandably a difficult aspect to research due to its murky and dangerous nature and is by far our least understood stage of the model. So how do we know what we do know? As I mentioned, a lot of the understanding comes from studies of other trafficked objects. We also get data from things like legal and customs documents, leaks like the Panama Papers, or investigative journalism. Often journalists are able to access aspects that scholars can't. I've included some entertaining reads by journalists that tackle the illicit market. Academic work that examines transit includes Dr. Moore Kursel's work examining Israel's legal antiquities market. She found that smugglers use these seemingly legitimate markets to introduce and move illicit objects onto the legal market through lax regulations before moving those objects onto further markets. Objects would obtain seemingly legal documentation before moving on, allowing for the continued traffic of objects. Quantitative research into the transit aspects include the use of algorithms and data scraping, which helps show how these objects move through networks and how these networks are interlinked. Here you'll see the Athar project, which documents trafficking on Facebook. And this is a network model, so showing how there's essentially only a handful of actual traffickers, but how they're all linked together and using different intermediaries. This is invaluable information for understanding how objects get to their destinations and who's involved. So following the flow of objects through the end is the market. When we say the market, we mean it's where the objects end up. This stage, the objects exist in legitimate white market and have an appearance of legitimacy and legality and are seen as commodities. Market countries are characterized as politically and economically secure and are overwhelmingly in the West, although Asia and China in particular is an emerging market. Oftentimes, when an illicit object comes into the market, it's the first time we know it exists. Actors in this phase include auction houses, dealers, collectors, museums, and scholars. These are often well-placed and powerful and respected individuals and institutions that do not see themselves and their actions as criminal or unethical. And it is important to emphasize that these actors are generally not criminals. They aren't seeking out looted objects. Many see themselves as philanthropists or saviors of archaeological records. Many are either naive or willfully unaware of the implications of the trade of antiquities. Not that that is an excuse by any means. We study the market because without the market, without that motivating goal, be it a big payday or the social and cultural capital that comes with collecting. Without that demand, the trade in antiquities would cease to exist. Here you see two headlines involving Egypt and illicit objects in the market. The now famous case of the Met Golden Mummy, which they lost $4 million on, and the bust of King Tut that was auctioned in Christie's in 2019. And since it's gone into private hands and we have no idea where it is. This slide has a lot of research on it. I'm sorry for all the text. It's just if you want to see different types of research into the market. So some of the big cases are looking at what influences it, what the consequences are, how effective regulations have been. One of the main sources of data are sales records, either from auction catalogs or acquisition records. One of the big first cases to ever look at the market and look at that kind of data was done in 2001, and they concluded that over 75% of Bronze Age figures had no verifiable find spot, and they determined that the most were illicit in nature and were responsible for the destruction of the archaeological record of approximately 11,000 graves, resulting in unmeasurable loss of knowledge, which they termed the material and intellectual consequences of esteem. Norskov, who's the book that I've included, for their research, they looked at Greek pottery, and they concluded between 80 and 90% of objects on the market in museums had no verifiable provenance before 1996. And they contextualized the demand for Greek pottery within West's overall collecting history and the cultural significance of these collections, both private and public. Norskov also identified the invisible market, where private sales occur in auction houses, but no public records exist, making the sales invisible and thus impossible to trace. Other things that have been looked at is the effectiveness of international regulations. One study looks at the fact that international regulations are not taken on board by market countries unless they've been prosecuted in market nations. So understanding the effectiveness, so we can pass all these laws we want, but if they're not upheld in court, then it doesn't do anything. But yeah, so those are some of the studies on the market. Some final considerations when researching and discussing the market for antiquities. The art and antiquities market is a multi-billion-dollar annual industry. The art and antiquities market generates exorbitant prices and high media attention, which reduces archaeological material to a commercial monetary value. Record prices achieved on the market and headlines like these seen here help fuel market demand, which becomes an incentive for looting. Due to the opaque nature of the market, it's difficult to quantify the scale of the market. However, it is estimated between 65 and 90% of antiquities offered for sale on the market have no clear published provenance, which suggests that a large, perhaps major portion of the market is compromised. This clearly indicates an immense threat to cultural heritage. Plainly, the legal and illegal market for antiquities cannot exist without other. And we as archaeologists have our own responsibilities within the market. It is important that we do not work with unprovenanced objects and that we do not authenticate objects for others, and that we are always mindful of how we speak and publish about cultural heritage. Just as in the archaeological record, context is vital when seeing the big picture. This research influences allocation of resources, funding, national and international regulations, and policies. It is vital that we present contextualized research in order to effectively combat the illicit trade in antiquities. Trade in antiquities is not a victimless crime. It is our responsibility to present factual and well-considered research. Overall, research into the antiquities market offers exciting and innovative opportunities to investigate how cultural heritage functions in today's society. I look forward to your thoughts and questions, and thank you. There's my bibliography if you want it. And that's me.